finished exactly on time for our closing plenary. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everybody for staying with us from 11 this morning, especially to those of you who've been there right from the beginning. Thank you, Mary, you've talked about Zoom being tiring and having to concentrate more, and I'm sure we can all relate to that. So thank you so much for being here and exercising your right as members to democracy and to set Another Europe is Possible's campaigning outlook. So for this closing plenary, we're going to have a few words from Mary Kaldor, who is on our national committee, has been part of the founding process of Another Europe is Possible. Also Joseph Healy, who's been on our national committee for a number of years and has been struggling with us on the streets and online for a number of years, quite passionately, and has made some great contributions to our campaigning priorities. So we'll hear from Joseph and Mary, and we'll also hear from Niccolo, who is co-founder of our partner organisation, European Alternatives. Niccolo, I think you're already here. If you'd like to unmute and tell us a bit about your European perspective, that would be great.
Thanks very much, Seema, and congratulations to everybody for such a great general meeting on Zoom, and in particular to Seema and the other colleagues at Another Europe who have organised it. As Seema said, I'm co-founder and director of European Alternatives, and in that capacity, I have a seat on the steering committee of Another Europe. It's a great pleasure to participate. I'm speaking to you from Paris, and I want to say at this late stage of the day, three main messages in a very brief format. The first one is this, that you'll all remember during the referendum campaign in the UK, the tedious argument that the European Union is unreformable. I'd like to say that that argument that the EU is unreformable is now totally dead in the water. The last year and a half during the pandemic has marked a kind of watershed moment in the talk about reforming the European Union. A number of taboos have been broken, most recently, just a few days ago, the new German coalition government agreements talking explicitly about treaty change. And so the idea that the European Union is unreformable is no longer a valid argument. It never was one, but now there's no possibility of sustaining such an argument anymore. And that means that the battle really is on about the future direction of the European Union. And as we've heard today, there are very many dangerous, worrying tendencies in the European Union at the moment, but there are also some things that we could be more positive about. To continue to talk about the German coalition government agreement, mentions of a minimum wage throughout Europe, for example, democratizing to some extent economic decision-making, two aspects that we should be working with. On the other hand, in that same coalition agreement, some of the messages about migration management are very worrying indeed. So Europe is clearly going to change direction these coming years, and the battle is which way that should go. That's the first message. The second message is that in that ongoing battle, the UK, despite being outside of the European Union, and the UK government is very much deeply involved. It's obviously deeply involved in the discussions about the nature of the EU's external borders, not only the English Channel, but also the Polish-Belarusian border. And we should remember that the Conservative Party used to sit in the same group in the European Parliament as the Polish Law and Justice Party. And it's no accident that British soldiers were sent to the Polish border. There are deep relationships there. The UK government is involved in that geopolitical battle. And that's not the only example. And so what happens in the UK and the UK's government is affecting the whole of the European Union. And I think that in that context, the reflex of members of another Europe is possible, the internationalist reflex, to say that what is happening, across a couple of countries away is of deep concern to us, is absolutely the right reflex, whether it comes to migration, whether it comes to COVID vaccines, whether it comes to, sorry, whether it comes to the climate. And so I think the internationalism of another Europe is essential. Also, to continue on the example of the Belarus-Polish border, understanding, as I think everybody here does, that the refugees in the forest are a victim of Europe's border policies, just as political prisoners in Belarus are victims of a geopolitical situation. And those are both of concern to us as internationalists. And so thirdly, I want to say that the European Union, the whole of Europe, really requires people like you, members of Another Europe is Possible, precisely because you're able to make the connections between different kinds of issues. We've just seen how in this wonderful series of resolutions that have just been passed, connections are made between nativism, Islamophobia, trans rights, the environment, these connections, understanding that there is a kind of far-right neoliberal project which concerns transforming society. And we need to have a superior answer to that, which is about building another Europe for another world. And I really feel, as Director of European Alternatives, that immense value every time we're able to invite someone from the UK pro-European left into other European contexts, into other European conversations, because you have kind of first-hand experience of the ways that different issues connect, and the ways that if you allow one section to become a race to the bottom, it starts to infect other issues in other parts of life and affect other kinds of people. And so this conception of solidarity and really the demand that another Europe is possible is so important in the coming period. And so I'm really delighted with the continued partnership between Another Europe and European Alternatives. And I want to encourage you to continue to work with all your extended family across Europe. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Niccolo. And we're so delighted to have European Alternatives as a partner as well. I was really lucky to attend the Citizens Takeover Europe Palermo Transnational Climate Assembly a few months ago, and there was a really brilliant declaration on climate that's mobilizing an entire movement across Europe, and we need to continue that really important work. So thank you for that great motivational introduction and speech. I will now move on to Mary, and bear with me because I'm just doing the tech as well. So I'll just spotlight Mary.
Hello.
And there you are.
Okay. So, well, it was a very, very good day. And I'm extremely proud that we're all still here. If we think about that day that Seema mentioned in the beginning, or maybe it was Elena, 2 years ago, after that horrible election, it wasn't obvious that Another Europe would survive. And not only have we survived, but I think our membership has remained relatively constant. So we should be very proud of that. And we should be very proud of all the campaigns that we've been involved in, the work that Elena's done on settled status, the work that Zoe's doing on migration, the work that Shaista's doing on Islamophobia. All of that is still going on. It's an incredibly bleak time that we're living through. At least certainly, I mean, Niccolo has just been giving us some optimism about Europe, but it's certainly a very bleak time in this country with a corrupt and ridiculous and absurd government and a woefully inadequate opposition. And for me, that's what makes it all the more important that we keep going. Not only because it's really important to have a space where like-minded people can feel empowered, but also because I think we've just got to preserve decency in this country. And unless we make a real effort to preserve decency, I'm just terribly worried about what our political class will do to our society. So these are all the reasons why I think it's so important that we all keep going. I wanted to say also a few words about how important what's happening in Europe is. And I think I agree with Niccolo. There are some reasons to be optimistic. And the first one, obviously, is the new German coalition and the commitments it's made. I think the second one, and this is not necessarily in order, is the European Recovery Plan and the introduction of Eurobonds, which I do think is going to be transformative and will gain momentum and could really contribute to redistribution across Europe. And the third one, of course, I know Niccolo's a bit skeptical about what it will lead to, is the Conference on the Future of Europe and the various ideas that are going around for greater democratization. I think if we could get a directly elected or even a Spitzenkandidat system, but real accountable politicians at the top of the European Union, and if we felt that was our political space, it would transform so much that's happening in the rest of Europe. So having said that, there are, of course, huge pitfalls, and it's those pitfalls which I think we've got to be engaged with, or we should be engaged with the positive things too. One of the most obvious pitfall, which I think we heard movingly from Elena and from Zoe, is, of course, migration. It is completely shocking, the overall consensus of the political class about the migration and the complete absence of compassion for human beings on the border. And I really do think this is the Achilles heel of the European Union. I've just written a piece for El País about it. I just think that it is the European Union's potentially fatal weakness, because the European Union's whole legitimacy depends on values. There's famously, it's been called the normative Europe, a normative power, and it's all about solidarity, democracy, human rights. These are all the values that are in the Constitution. And I just think migration undermines all that. And that's what Belarus and Russia were all about. That's what Putin was trying to do. He was trying to expose the hypocrisy of the European Union, and it succeeded. So I think that's really why migration, I mean, it's not why migration is such an important issue, because I think migration is an important issue in itself. I mean, we just have to help those people who are suffering. The second worry is, of course, the rise of authoritarianism. And I think not enough has been said about the link with corruption. We've seen how so much of the money that was made available for COVID has gone into the pockets of the Brexit supporting politicians and their crony companies. I fear that could happen in places like Poland and Hungary with the Recovery Fund, unless they're all, I think we need much greater transparency. So all of those issues are all connected. And I think the other issue I wanted to raise, I'm sure we could think of more, is what Glyn was talking about. I think the European Union is really in danger of just following the US lead on foreign policy issues. It did that on Afghanistan. It's now doing that in the Indo-Pacific region. I'm very, very alarmed by the continuing war on terror and the sort of campaign of long-distance assassination, which is leading, I think, to the growth of ISIS and Daesh and its extension over large regions. So, and the way that the French, at least, are very integrated into all of that. So I think that's another concern that we should be taking seriously. So these are all reasons why we need to be engaged in all these issues. I think what we've had today is lots of very exciting ideas. I thought the discussion between Laura and Alex was just wonderful. And I really do think we've got to think about an emotional way, as somebody said in our breakout group, of expressing what we want. And I do think it's around finding a voice for people. It is around democratic and civic issues. And I think we should continue what we're doing and have a lot more discussion about all of that. And all I otherwise want to say is a huge thank you to Seema, Elena, Luke, who've kept this whole show on the road. I think Brexit Spotlight is absolutely brilliant, and it's going to really help us go forward in the future.
Thank you so much, Mary, for those kind words. And I'm sure we all feel motivated now to keep going with Another Europe as possible. But also thank you for everything you've put into the project. We couldn't have done it without you. Joseph, over to you.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm going to make a bit of a detour into the realms of art and history, I'm afraid. So I just wanted to draw your attention to a very good exhibition that's on at the moment in Tate Britain called Hogarth and Europe. And if people are familiar with Hogarth's work, they know he's probably the most English, the most Brexiteer of all English painters. And one of his paintings, which I've always thought encapsulates the spirit of Brexit, is his painting The Gates of Calais, sometimes called the roast beef of old England, in which he paints a fat French friar looking very hungrily at a large haunch of British beef, English beef, surrounded by emaciated French soldiers, with a starving Jacobite skulking in the corner, who's obviously escaped from the 1745 rebellion. And it sort of sums up, really, so many of the themes of Brexit: xenophobia, hatred of the French, anti-Catholicism, and all the rest. It's all there in that painting. And it's very interesting when you visit the exhibition, you actually see how Hogarth influenced other European painters, his contemporaries, and how he was also influenced. And it's sort of a message to me that even Hogarth could not escape the influence of Europe. And when we look at the long 19th century, when Britain tried to escape from Europe for 100 years, after the Napoleonic Wars and so on, it was pulled back. There was an attempt at global Britain. At that time, there was the Empire, there was a global Britain, but it was pulled back because events in Europe inevitably overtook it, the First World War and the Second World War. There's a major historical lesson there that any attempt by Britain to dislodge itself from Europe, either geographically or historically or culturally, is doomed to failure. So I think this period is just an aberration, really, in the history of Britain. And of course, some of you know that I'm an Irish citizen, therefore an EU citizen. And I think Ireland is still in many ways the fulcrum of the Brexit debate. We can see that come to the fore now with the Northern Ireland Protocol, but it's been there all through the Brexit debate. And it started out, of course, with the Brexiteers ignoring the Belfast Agreement and ignoring the fact that there even was a problem with the border in Ireland, which they've now been rudely reawakened to. But if you look at the performance of the Northern Irish economy since Brexit, one startling fact stands out, that it's actually been the most successful region. And of course, this begs the question, why? And the answer is obvious, because it has access to the single market. It still has free trade with the European Union, and all of the other regions have been behind. And this is another reason why the Brexiteers absolutely hate the current protocol, because it's the major argument against why Brexit is failing. And we can see the trade figures between Britain and Ireland have changed enormously, with most Irish trade now going to the EU rather than to Britain. So I think, there was a joke back in the 60s, at the time of Enoch Powell, that the only reason why Powell didn't want to deport the Irish, along with everybody else, was because every Englishman has an Irish grandmother. And my joke now is that every Englishman is desperately seeking an Irish grandmother because they're all looking for an Irish passport or an EU passport in order to travel freely and so on. So I think that Another Europe is Possible has really carved out a unique space for the pro-European left in this country. And I think it's, very, very important that it remains. And I'm proud to have been an NC member. I think Brexit was the Pandora's box that we all warned about. And we have seen since that box has been opened, the rise in xenophobia, racism, hatred of refugees, all of the things we predicted would happen have happened. And that's across the economic front, the cultural front, and every other front. Even the fact that artists from the UK can no longer perform in Europe and so on. It's been a very limiting, appalling experience, and even in the short period that we've had it. So I think that Another Europe, again, very important that we are there. Our unique selling point is that for an insular British left, which often doesn't look towards Europe, that we do, and we want to maintain contacts with that Europe. I would differ slightly from what Mary and Niccolo have said, in that I was at the European Forum last weekend, which Seema also attended, and heard the co-leader of the European left in the European Parliament warn that the current German government, the new German government, now that its finance minister is from the neoliberal FDP party, is committed to the Stability and Growth Pact, which would mean renewed austerity in Europe. If that is the case, that will be very, very dangerous for the future of Europe, because we can see now the spectre of fascism arising again in France and Italy. And I hope that Another Europe will hold some events on this imminent threat in the year going forward. But I think, the clue is in our name, Another Europe. We want a different Europe, a better Europe, and a more radical Europe. So I'd like to pay tribute to Michael Chesham, who led this organization through many difficult years. I'd like to pay tribute, as Mary has said, to my fellow members on the NC and to Seema, who's taken over and done a brilliant job so far. I will be leaving the NC after a number of years. I'm really proud to have served on it, but I will be still there as an activist and supporter, and wish you all success for the future.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and we will miss you very dearly on the NC, but I'm sure we'll still be seeing you at our events and taking part in our campaigns. And yes, Michael is here in the audience. I don't know if he wants to pop up and say anything. If not, I'm sure you are all looking forward to your dinners and your Saturday evenings. I'm going for a Christmas dinner soon, so I shall close up and be as quick as I can. I want to reiterate Mary's thanks and especially give a huge thank you to Elena. This conference wouldn't be possible without your support on the back end. And also I want to thank everyone on the executive and the national committee who've helped put this together. I won't name you all individually, but you know who you are. But most importantly, I want to say thank you to you, all of the members, because without you, our movement would not be possible. We are a member-led and member-run organisation, and we really need you to get involved in any way that you can, whether that's online, through our letter writing tools, campaigning in your political parties, in your trade unions, and also joining us on the streets at protests and rallies in whatever capacity you can campaign. So a massive and huge thank you to you for your continued support. We've also all been watching the news, and we all know about the dangerous authoritarian turn this UK government is taking, as Zoe and others clearly outlined earlier today. And this authoritarian turn is also happening in Europe. But that means that we shouldn't be disheartened. It means we need to fight back more than ever. We need to fight back on the climate. We need to fight back on migration, on trans rights, against Islamophobia. And we need a radical, pluralist, internationalist movement. We started as the left-wing anti-Brexit campaign, and formally and legally, Brexit might be done. But the politics underlying Brexit and the attacks on human rights, migrant rights, and workers' rights that Brexit has enabled are only getting worse, and they still need to be fought more than ever. As we've heard, our political system is rigged, but the mass movements and the social movements are alive. Izzy Warren spoke to us earlier today, a student climate striker, and she gave an inspiring and motivational speech which should give all of us hope. We can, if we join together, build a radical internationalist movement across borders. We can transform the economic system. We can tear down the borders, and we will build a world of hope and solidarity. I hope you'll stay with us on this journey. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.